Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bold Take Scouting Podcast. Today, we're going to be looking at several teams that are in the midst of a rebuild, analyzing their current situation, talking about what we would be doing at their head coach positions, quarterback positions, and in the draft, and then just looking at optimism for the future for these fan bases that are really hoping for a quicker turnaround than expected. And this is coming off the heels of a report by NFL Network insider Ian Rappaport, who said that Robert Saleh, head coach of the Jets, David Culley, head coach of the Houston Texans, and Dan Campbell, head coach of the Detroit Lions, were expected to be retained heading into next season. We're actually going to start with the other franchise that we're looking at today and then get into those. But so first off, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they are without a coach, unlike these other three teams. And Alex, what do you think of the Jaguars' situation right now?
So first, let's talk about what they have right now. Obviously, they have quarterback Trevor Lawrence, which obviously he hasn't played well this season. I mean, what can you expect from that team right now? But they have some other promising young players. They have Travis Etienne, Laviska Shenault, two young players on the offense that could definitely make an impact next year and help out Trevor Lawrence. And they're projected to have that first overall pick, so obviously that's huge. And in a draft where there's not a surefire number one overall pick at quarterback, it's looking likely that the Jaguars might end up staying with that first overall pick, and they'll have their choice between Kayvon Thibodeau and Aiden Hutchinson, who are two very, very good defensive end prospects.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that it is pretty concerning the way Trevor Lawrence has played, though. I know he's in a horrible situation, but given just how elite of a quarterback prospect he was, I would have even expected him to do better than he has done. Just watching some of his games, he I think it's gotten to him mentally how bad the situation is. He misses some throws that he just would have never missed last year. So I think the Jaguars' number one priority has to be just getting Trevor Lawrence back on track, because we all know that he is a great quarterback prospect. Like I said, I think one big thing for him will be Travis Etienne coming back from injury. Etienne's a guy who was playing at a high level with him when Lawrence was playing at the best football of his career so far. And then they definitely need to nail the head coaching spot. And let's look at some of the candidates that are being floated around. There's Jim Caldwell, Doug Peterson, Nate Hackett, Byron Leftwich, Kellen Moore, Matt Eberflus, and Todd Bowles. It's tough to really pick out who I think they should be hiring. I think that the idea of bringing in Jim Caldwell is not too bad, because he's experienced. He's been around the league a lot, and I think that they need a sure thing right now. They can't roll the dice again like they did with Urban Meyer. That ended up in an absolute catastrophe, and that you just cannot put Trevor Lawrence's development at stake for a second year in a row. So I think that if they were to bring in Caldwell, who also has history as a quarterbacks coach on multiple teams in this league, maybe that would help them. Maybe they do go for a younger offensive mind like Hackett or like Moore. But the absolute priority and the lens through which they should be approaching this coaching hire is, how do we better Trevor Lawrence?
Yeah, I think the way they need to approach this whole offseason is, how do we better Trevor Lawrence? How do we support him? I think in regards to coaches, if I was running the Jaguars, obviously I'm not, I would go with Jim Caldwell. I think when he got fired from Detroit, I don't think it was really deserving. I mean, he had brought Detroit to, was it one or two playoff appearances in his time in Detroit? And as we know, Detroit has been a very poor football franchise over the past, say, 20 years. And I think he's been the best head coach in Detroit for, a while now. And I don't think when he got fired, it was necessarily fair. Obviously, the GM was brought in after him, and he wanted to bring in his own guy in Matt Patricia. We all know how that ended. But like you said, I think Jim Caldwell has plenty of experience. He coached the Colts to a Super Bowl. Obviously, they lost to the Saints, but I think someone that has experience being successful, bringing teams to playoffs and bringing teams that maybe didn't have a lot of talent and making them successful. So that's why I would probably go with Jim Caldwell. I do think Doug Peterson is interesting. I'm not sure how he would fit with everything that's going on in Jacksonville right now. But I mean, we saw he brought the Eagles to a Super Bowl. He, maybe didn't make the best decisions in regards to Carson Wentz, Jalen Hurts, that whole situation. But again, a guy with experience, Super Bowl experience, playoff experience. I think a guy that a lot of the players in Jacksonville would probably respect. And he could definitely be attractive to bring in some other talent as well.
Yeah, I think that the main message is just that they've got to do what they can to support Trevor Lawrence, get in a strong, experienced personality who knows how to lead an NFL locker room rather than taking a risk. And now let's look at a franchise that you already hinted at here, the Detroit Lions. And they're gonna have an interesting decision ahead of them. They currently have 2 wins, and their head coach Dan Campbell is expected to be retained, according to Ian Rappaport. And I have to say that I don't quite agree with that situation. I love Campbell's ability to be a leader of men. We know that he really gets his players to buy into what he's pitching, this hard-nosed, hard-working football. But I just don't think he has the coaching qualities to serve at the highest level in the NFL as a head coach. I think that time and time throughout the season, we've seen those coaching like faults on his part, and that's never going to go away. I really think that they love the culture he's built, the attitude that he's instilling in the team, but I think you can't let that blind you that he's just not a head coach quality coach. In short, I do think they should keep GM Brad Holmes, though. I think he's in the first year of his general manager career, and he was really highly touted as really the next generation of general managers. But to me, I don't think that Dan Campbell is the head coach of the future for this Detroit team in their rebuild.
I'm going to push back on you on that. I really like what Dan Campbell has done. I mean, obviously their record not great at all, but that roster was awful. I think many people expected them to be one of the worst teams in the league, as they have been, but they've lost a lot of close games. They lost to the Ravens on a last-second field goal. They were leading the Packers at halftime of one of their games. I think it was a Monday night game. And then, they had their 2 wins as of late, tied the Steelers. So they've had a lot of close games. And to me, sometimes with a head coach, especially in a city like Detroit that has been struggling for a while, that culture is huge. And like you mentioned it, he has built a culture in Detroit. And yeah, he's made some mistakes as a head coach, but he's a first-year head coach, and he's still a young guy. I think he's like 42 maybe. So he doesn't have the most coaching experience. He played in the NFL for, I want to say, right under 10 years. And he was with the Lions for a while. He was with the Saints when they won the Super Bowl. So he's seen successful coaching. Obviously, he was the interim head coach with the Dolphins when Joe Philbin was fired. But to me, the bottom line is that culture. He turned around the Detroit culture in one season. And yes, he's not the offensive guru or the defensive guru that a lot of people look for when they're hiring a head coach. But he's a leader of men, like you said. That locker room, I'm sure, is extremely coach-knit, close-knit. All the players love playing for him, and that is extremely important and can't be overlooked. Now it's up to him to go out and hire the best people to support him as offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, and, help him in the areas that he isn't, the best at, in game planning for the offense, game planning for the defense. But, he does things that I don't think a lot of coaches can do as well as he did in regards to building a culture. So to me, that is extremely important, especially for a team like the Lions.
Yeah, I know that you pointed to the fact that they lost a lot of close games this year, but at the same time, that does reflect on coaching very often. If you're losing more than the majority of the close games that you're in, that usually does fall on the responsibility of the coaches. But as you said, you do highlight the importance of building a culture and how he's been able to do that in Detroit. And so, maybe it's not the worst idea to bring him back next year. You said he's a young coach. Let him learn, and maybe we do see better coaching decisions on his part next year. And I think the other important thing in Detroit is the quarterback situation. And I think that we're both going to agree on this in saying that they're sitting at currently number 2 in the draft order. There isn't a quarterback worth taking that high. I personally don't have a quarterback rated in the top 10. It's difficult because I think that the quarterbacks in this draft class all have franchise quarterback potential, but they're too risky. None of them are sure bets, and I wouldn't be spending nearly that high of a selection on them. You have a guy like Jared Goff who's good enough to get you through this rebuild until you find your quarterback of the future. I'd say that the Detroit Lions should keep just accumulating talent. They have 2 picks in the first round at number 2 and at number 30. I think you can get a blue chip prospect like Thibodeau or Hutchinson or Evan Neal at number 2, and then come back and get another first round talent for 30. Off the top of my head, if they were to combine, say, Hutchinson at number 2 with a guy like Trent McDuffie at number 30, that would really give a lot of support to their defense.
Yeah, I think, like you said, accumulating talent right now is the most important thing for the Lions. And, not to jump forward to the 2023 draft class, but it seems like there will be quite a bit of quarterback talent in that draft class. In regards to, maybe a guy like Bryce Young might end up declaring for the 2023 NFL draft. And I think if the Lions can continue building that culture that they have, continue accumulating really great talent. Obviously, they have guys like Penei Sewell, Amon-Ra St. Brown, DeAndre Swift, a great young core. If they can add to that with a guy, like you said, Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, true blue chip prospects, build that team up, and then, maybe in 2023 be able to drop a quarterback in to a very talented team, and they might be able to see more immediate success for a rookie quarterback than if they were to take one this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. You definitely do have to understand that they have a good young core. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown was an absolute steal in the 4th round. We pinned him as one of the best picks of the draft, and he has come on so strong last few weeks. Maybe if they were to get a couple of defensive players on day 1, really upgrade that defense that has struggled a lot this year, and then on day 2 they find a wide receiver like Elijah Moore was picked in the 2nd round last year, then I think that they could be well on their way to a successful rebuild, and hopefully Dan Campbell can make those strides at the head coach job like we're hoping he can.
Yeah, and I think we'll move on to the team that would right now have the 3rd pick in the draft, the Houston Texans. And they're in a little bit of a confusing situation for me. They hired, David Culley to be their head coach when, it seemed like not a lot of people would end up taking that job. And the Texans have, especially in the last few weeks, exceeded expectations. They won some games that no one really thought they would win. And they're, according to Ian Rappaport, at least they're planning on retaining David Culley. And, that one kind of confuses me a little bit. I respect the job he's done. And, like I said, having the Texans exceed expectations, he's been through a lot with the whole Deshaun Watson situation. But, for a team that's trying to rebuild, I think having a 70-plus-year-old head coach maybe isn't the best idea, just because it doesn't seem like he's going to be there for the long run, even if they are super successful. And I think when you're trying to rebuild, you want a young head coach that plans on being there for, 10, 15 years if you can get this rebuild right.
Yeah, I tend to agree with your point. Well, first of all, he's 66, not 70, but that's really doesn't change the fact that he's not a young quarterback who's going to be here throughout their, or young head coach who's going to be here throughout their rebuilds. And I think when you're in the midst of a rebuild, it's important to find your head coach of the future. If I were the Houston Texans, I would explore my options. I wouldn't just immediately fire David Culley and go find the next option, because Nick Caserio is his first job at general manager. It's not easy to get a second job at GM if you don't succeed with your first one. You have a head coach here who really isn't your head coach of the future, like I said, but he exceeded expectations. The team is better than we thought. A lot of people, us included, thought they might even be an 0-17 season in Houston with a lack of talent on that roster. And they've won a couple games and they've been competitive in others. I mean, there's a couple teams currently in the playoff picture, like the Patriots, like the 49ers, that went down to the wire with the Texans. And I think that speaks to Culley's ability to rally that team together and pull off some really good coaching moves. And so I would explore my options, but not necessarily push Culley out the door immediately. What I would do at the quarterback position, though, because that's another important decision they have, is actually give Davis Mills his chance in 2022. I wouldn't expect myself to say that heading into the season. I wasn't particularly high on Davis Mills, and I know you weren't either, but I think he's been good enough that he earns himself that shot, and he's especially lucky that there's no top quarterback prospects in this draft class because they're going to be sitting around number 3. There's nobody worth taking that high, so reinforce your roster with talent and see if Mills can be that guy by affording him the chance to lead this team throughout the offseason and into the 2022 season.
Yeah, I completely agree with the idea of sticking with Davis Mills, and I think the reasoning for that, obviously, like we said, Davis Mills has played well, especially for a rookie quarterback on a team that's that talent deprived. But like you said, there is no quarterback at the top of the draft that is worthy of a number 3 overall pick. If this was 2021 and you had a quarterback, obviously he was drafted in 2021, but if there was the same situation in the draft where there were, 2 guys at the top that were both worthy of number 1 overall picks, and then guys like Justin Fields, Trey Lance, and, Mac Jones that were, worthy of first overall or first round picks, and especially we thought Fields and Lance were worthy of, potential top 10 picks, then you have to start thinking, if you're the Texans, to take a quarterback and move on from Davis Mills. But obviously that's not the case. Like we said, there is no quarterback that we think is worthy of a top 10 pick. So I agree with you. Let's stick with Davis Mills, see if he can continue to improve in 2022. And, if he does, and if he looks like a potential franchise quarterback, then, you got to steal. And if not, like I mentioned with the Lions, there's quite a bit of quarterback talent that could be potentially declaring for 2023.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to also remember that Cesario didn't just make Davis Mills any third-round selection. That third-round selection was actually the Texans' first pick in the 2021 NFL draft. So Cesario, first-time GM, made his first selection ever as a general manager, Davis Mills, with obviously the intention of him becoming the quarterback of the future. So I have no doubt in my mind that they will do as we're suggesting here and give Mills a shot in 2022. And I'm intrigued to see what they do with the 3rd overall pick. If they were to Thibodeau and Hutchinson go off the board 1-2, I think Evan Neal would be a tremendous selection there in terms of protecting the quarterback and getting the run game going more than it did this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think we both really like Evan Neal as a prospect. So, again, protecting the quarterback is always a top priority, and you can really never have too many good offensive linemen. And I think we can move on now to the team with the projected 4th overall pick, and that would be the New York Jets, with the head coach of Robert Saleh, who is also expected to be retained. Joe Douglas in his 3rd offseason as a GM. So this is a pretty big offseason for Joe Douglas in regards to continuing to accumulate talent. I think he did a really good job with that last year. Obviously taking Zach Wilson, who has looked a lot better after coming back from injury. I think we talked about this halfway through the season when Zach Wilson was injured, and we mentioned that hopefully the injury could allow him to sit back and really, watch how veteran quarterbacks prepared for game day, how they went throughout the week, and maybe allow him to sit back and, look at what decisions he was making poorly and really fix them. And I think he's really showed that, and we'll talk about that more in our rookie review. But definitely down the stretch, he's looked a lot more improved in the second half of the season.
Yeah, we learned throughout the draft process that Zach Wilson was a really hardworking quarterback who really just sat down in the film room and grinded to make sure that he got better as a player. And I think we've seen that over the course of this season. I think the injury gave him time to get out of the weekly routine of just immediately prepping for the next opponent and actually just reflect into his own tape throughout the first half of the season. And he's come out and he's played a lot better football. He actually doesn't have an interception in the last 4 weeks compared to how many picks he threw earlier in the season. He's making much better decisions. He's reading the defense better. And this growth over the course of the season by Wilson is extremely encouraging for the Jets. And now they don't have a quarterback question on their hands. Zach Wilson is the guy that they're going to hope is the quarterback of the future. Right now, their aim in their rebuild is to better the situation around him. And I think they're in a prime position to do that in the draft with likely 2 top 10 picks. If you look at the talent in this draft. I really like the guys that are going to be going in that range. They can really nail those picks even if they're not necessarily on the offensive side of the board. Say they were to get Kyle Hamilton and Devin Lloyd, for example, that's making your defense way better. And that helps your rookie quarterback too when your defense is better than it was this year. And I think as for the coaching situation, I know it's been a tough go for Robert Saleh and the rest of the coaching staff, but they're all first year coaches in their positions. He's a first year head coach. LaFleur is a first year offensive coordinator. I think you got to let this coaching staff grow into their positions. And with another full offseason to work and reflect on this season, I think they'll step up too. And if I was a Jets fan, I definitely would have hope with Wilson at the helm in terms of how much he's improved and how I really liked him as a prospect in the first place. And this coaching staff definitely has the talent to be good in the NFL, and another year to grow could do a lot of help for them.
Yeah, and going back to something you mentioned earlier with Joe Douglas entering his third offseason, and obviously being super important to bring in talent. He brought in a lot of talent last year through the draft. I mean, we can look at the 2021 draft specifically. Obviously, Zach Wilson, second overall. He traded up for Elijah Vera Tucker, and that's looking like a very good pick for the Jets as well, as he played very well. The top of the second round, they took Elijah Moore. The beginning of day 3, they took Michael Carter, and then they drafted a few defensive backs that are showing to have some promise. And then, from 2020, they have another defensive back, Bryce Hall, who played very well to start the season. And obviously the Jets defense has struggled as of late, but definitely a lot of young promise on that Jets team.
I agree. You got to give Douglas credit for what he was able to do in last year's draft. As you said, they had 4 impact players come out of day. They had 4 impact players come out of day 3, which is really just a tremendous job by Joe Douglas. There's news that Mekhi Becton might be on his way out of New York, and I think that does reflect poorly on who made him the 11th overall pick in 2020. But from that, as you said, he's done a really good job with surrounding the quarterback of the future, which we're hoping is Zach Wilson, with a lot of talent.
Yeah, and I think, like we mentioned, they have quite a few picks in the top 50 entering the 2022 draft. Like you said, they have 2 picks in the top 10, but then they also have 2 picks at the top of the second round as well. Obviously, they have their own, and they have a second-round pick from Carolina with the Sam Darnold trade, and that's looking like a great move by Joe Douglas to trade Darnold off and get a second-round pick in 2022. So 4 picks in the top 50, a lot of potential to improve that roster.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to see them do is draft another running back, and I think the early round 2 would be a good place to do that. I like Michael Carter a lot, but I like him especially as a change of pace back. He's really not a guy that you think is going to be carrying the bulk of the workload. He's not. He didn't at UNC. There was Javonte Williams there. If you could kind of replicate that situation, draft a guy like Isaiah Spiller or Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker towards the top of round 2, I think they could get a really good running game going, and that would help Zach Wilson a lot.
Yeah, I think another thing the Jets should be focused on is getting Zach Wilson another wide receiver to throw the ball to. Obviously, Elijah Moore has played very well in the time that he's been able to play as a rookie, but outside of Elijah Moore, they don't really look like they've had really good wide receivers. They have Jamison Crowder, Denzel Mims, who was drafted in 2020, who has done next to nothing. So getting Zach Wilson a reliable, maybe a bigger jump ball target would be definitely something the Jets should look into as well. Elijah Moore, quicker, shorter, probably slot receiver who's, a dynamic playmaker. Just Zach Wilson could probably use either a tight end or a bigger wide receiver that, he could feel comfortable throwing 50-50 balls to.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that both those moves would really go such a long way to helping Zach Wilson. And, the Jets, as we said, are in a pretty good position. They've got a quarterback with clear franchise potential, a young head coaching staff that can grow into their positions and perform at it well, hopefully, and tons of picks to be able to support that quarterback and that rebuild. So of all these rebuilds, I think the Jets might be in the best position.
Yeah, and I think with the last few minutes, maybe we can talk about a team that might not be in the greatest position in terms of a rebuild in 2022, and that would be the Chicago Bears. Matt Nagy's the head coach. He's expected to be fired. There's been rumors since the middle of November that he would be fired, and it's really seeming like he's on his way out. And I mean, some potential head coaching candidates for them. Similar to the Texans, you could do a guy like Jim Caldwell, Doug Peterson. Um, and then, there's some younger guys like Nate Hackett, Brian Leftwich, maybe Kellen Moore. A name that I heard connected specifically to the Bears could possibly be Josh McDaniels. I'm not sure if, the Bears ownership would trust McDaniels knowing what happened with the Colts a few years ago. But I mean, the Bears is a tough situation right now. You have a quarterback in Justin Fields who hasn't played great. Obviously, he's a rookie, and both of us believed in him quite a bit entering the draft. But they don't have a first rounder from trading up with Justin Fields. They really don't have a ton of promising young talent on the roster. So it might be a difficult spot to bring in a new head coach, especially because, obviously not everyone's going to be a fan of Justin Fields.
Yeah, I think you're right to bring up the Bears because, as you said, it's really not that great a spot. I think it really starts before even looking at the head coach and hiring the right GM. I'm astounded that Ryan Pace has gotten the amount of time in that job that he has. Especially with how he really hurt the Bears' future by picking Mitch Trubisky over both Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. We both at the time had Trubisky behind those other quarterbacks, and a lot of people did. Yeah, he picked Trubisky. He's also committed money to Mike Glennon in the past. He obviously couldn't get that quarterback position right. He ended up picking Justin Fields, and hopefully that he did get it right. But regardless, I don't think he should be there to be able to see whether or not he did because of how poorly he's done the rest of the time in that job. So they've got to first get a GM in there that knows what he's doing, has a better track record, has a better chance of being successful in this league, and then turn to the head coaching position and find the best candidate to support Justin Fields. It has to be someone who's fully in love with Justin Fields, thinks he has such a bright future in the NFL and is going to do everything they can to uncover his potential and has a plan to uncover his potential. He's going to coach to his play style because I think that's something that we didn't really see this year. I think Nagy just ran what he is used to running as an offense, didn't necessarily play to Fields' strengths and minimize his weaknesses. I still really like Justin Fields. I think he can have a bright future in this league. So they just really need to nail the head coaching job in terms of getting someone who knows how to get the best out of Fields and develop him well.
Yeah, a guy that I would throw out there for a potential head coaching job that was mentioned multiple years in the past, but hasn't really been brought up this year is Eric Bieniemy, the Chiefs' offensive coordinator. I mean, I think maybe the Bears might not go there because that's where they got Matt Nagy.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Eric Bieniemy has obviously Andy Reid calls the plays, but Andy Reid has said it, years in a row that Eric Bieniemy is his right hand man when designing the play calling for each week, and obviously he's had a role in keeping this Chiefs offense where it is. And we saw the Chiefs go through some struggles early on in the season, but they look to be hitting on all cylinders on offense now. And I think that Eric Bieniemy, a guy with a lot of success as an offensive coordinator, going to 2 Super Bowls, winning one. I think he's been around a lot of great coaches, especially Andy Reid. So I think he would be an interesting hire to bring in that has experience on a successful team. So he can, bring things over that he's seen other coaches do that have been successful in the past.
My reservation with Bieniemy, though, is that he's been through the head coaching carousel in terms of going through interviews and everything about 3 times now, and he's failed to get a job. And reports say that it's because he's bad at interviewing. And I would be surprised if someone who's bad at interviewing for head coach position could succeed in that role. Maybe he is just best fit as a coordinator. For me, I would look at different offensive minds. It's tough to just give a name and support that name because we don't get to interview them or talk to them. We don't know whether or not they have what it takes in terms of personality to lead a whole locker room of men and make those decisions that come with doing so. But guys like Kellen Moore and Nathaniel Hackett could be more interesting names in my opinion. I think that they've got to go with an offensive mind who knows how to get the best of Fields, and maybe one of those guys really likes Justin Fields and it could see themselves developing him successfully. I wouldn't necessarily go with Bieniemy because if he went through that cycle 3 times and it didn't work, there's probably good reason for that.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. I think that really wraps it up with the Bears. I think they might have the hardest time doing a quick turnaround at rebuild. And I think teams like the Jets and even the Jaguars have some potential to turn around in 2022. I think that wraps up this episode of the Bold Take Scouting podcast, and we'll be back with another episode